Imagine if AOC got to write history books and they said, why did people sneak into America? Oh, climate change.
Climate change is different because we have an expert.
The narrative begins with a satirical take on what history books might look like if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, commonly known as AOC, were to author them. It imagines a simplistic explanation for complex issues like migration, pinning the blame squarely on climate change. The text mocks the idea that in 2 decades, people might look back and claim that climate change alone drove masses from Guatemala to Michigan seeking plane tickets to escape environmental collapse. It paints a picture of AOC setting a 12-year deadline to reverse climate change, a claim presented as overly simplistic and dismissive of other factors like economic disparity, political instability, or violence. The critique suggests that such a narrow focus ignores the multifaceted nature of global migration, sarcastically noting that even if Chinese-speaking communities appeared along migration routes, AOC might still attribute it to climate change, brushing off any deeper geopolitical concerns. The fear is that endless debates will yield only weak solutions, like a feeble carbon tax, leaving future generations to face dire consequences, akin to a frog boiling slowly in a pot, unaware of the rising danger. The discussion then shifts to a sharp critique of AOC's public persona, fueled by recent commentary from Bill Maher and Joe Rogan. The two media figures, known for their unfiltered takes, have reportedly turned on AOC, with their critiques described as a brutal blend of roast and political intervention. This shift stems from allegations that AOC fabricated parts of her upbringing, a claim that multiple outlets have supposedly exposed, though specifics remain vague. Maher and Rogan, once intrigued by her, now treat her pronouncements with mockery, dissecting her statements with a mix of humor and disdain. The text highlights a canceled congressional briefing, suggesting disarray behind the scenes, with AOC's rhetoric framed as performative and unconvincing, particularly when she labels conflicts as Trump's war or a Republican war. This is portrayed as a deflection, avoiding substantive engagement with policy challenges. Joe Rogan's evolving perspective on AOC is a focal point. Initially, he admired her as a bold, fresh voice in politics, praising her fiery speeches and her upset victory over a long-serving incumbent despite being outspent. He saw her as a young, charismatic figure who defied the odds through grassroots support. However, his view has soured. Now, Rogan views her as a political influencer chasing soundbites rather than a serious leader. His critiques, delivered with a grin, target her logic, particularly her claims about climate change dictating migration patterns or her assertion that global warming can be halted within a precise 12-year window. The text argues that these statements oversimplify complex issues, ignoring variables like poverty or political turmoil. What was once seen as youthful enthusiasm is now labeled as stubborn ignorance, with Rogan and others growing tired of her reliance on emotional appeals over factual depth. Bill Maher's commentary is described as even more cutting, clinical in its precision. He mocks the Democratic Party's tendency to prioritize compassion narratives over practical solutions, joking that they defend extraterrestrial invaders if it aligned with their ideology. The text paints a grim picture of real-world issues, fentanyl crises, human trafficking, overwhelmed communities that AOC and similar Democrats allegedly sidestep in favor of idealized rhetoric. Her focus on radical empathy and community centers for migrants, rather than border security or enforcement, is presented as a tone-deaf response to a crisis straining cities and towns. The critique suggests that AOC's approach prioritizes optics over substance, appealing to her base while ignoring the tangible fallout felt by everyday Americans. The text revisits AOC's early days, when her charisma and rebellious streak captivated audiences, including Rogan. Her grassroots victory and underdog story made her a standout in a sea of polished politicians. Yet, as scrutiny intensified, cracks appeared. Her speeches began to feel rehearsed, her policy positions shallow. The narrative argues that after years in Congress, her persistence in delivering oversimplified takes, such as attributing migration solely to climate change, reflects a refusal to evolve. Instead of grappling with complexity, she leans into theatrics, using emotional displays to mask a lack of depth. When pressed with tough questions, as in a notable interview on Israel-Palestine, she falters, offering vague responses that undermine her self-proclaimed expertise. This pattern, bold claims in friendly settings, weak follow-through under pressure, is presented as a hallmark of her political style. A particularly damning moment comes from a confrontation with Tony Bobulinski, where AOC attempts to challenge his testimony about Joe Biden. She asks if he witnessed Biden commit a crime, expecting to trip him up. Bobulinski calmly affirms, citing corruption and RICO violations, leaving AOC visibly unprepared, unaware that racketeering is a federal offense. Her attempt to discredit him backfires, exposing her lack of legal or policy fluency. The text frames this as emblematic of her broader approach, performative confidence that crumbles under scrutiny. Similarly, her criticism of a tax bill aimed at helping middle-class families is portrayed as misinformed. She falsely claimed it favored the wealthy while hurting low-income workers, a narrative debunked by Congressman Mike Lawler, who clarified the bill's benefits, like expanded child tax credits and no taxes on tips or overtime. AOC's reliance on a Bronx girl backstory is also challenged, with public records showing she grew up in affluent Yorktown Heights, casting doubt on her gritty origin tale. The narrative critiques AOC's broader impact on the Democratic Party, drawing parallels with Kamala Harris's failed campaign. Despite massive funding and media buzz, Harris's lack of a clear plan led to electoral defeat, a fate AOC risks if she continues prioritizing style over substance. The text argues that Democrats are stuck in a cycle of chasing viral moments and celebrity endorsements, ignoring voters' real concerns. AOC's focus on community centers over border enforcement exemplifies this disconnect, alienating even moderate Democrats who see her ideas as impractical. Her rhetoric, while emotionally charged, fails to address the strain on hospitals, shelters, and local budgets caused by unchecked migration. The text concludes with a stark assessment of AOC's presidential prospects, dismissing her as unfit for higher office. Her reliance on wokeness, shallow policy takes, and obsession with attention are seen as liabilities in a role demanding diplomacy and problem-solving. While her youth could be an asset, her refusal to grow, choosing clout over competence, disqualifies her from serious leadership. The narrative urges her to step back, study, and seek mentorship away from social media's echo chamber. Until then, she's portrayed as a performer, not a leader, whose theatrical style may draw crowds, but lacks the substance to govern. The critique ends by emphasizing that leadership requires results, not just hype, and AOC's current trajectory falls far short of that standard.